Welcome to Relax Story, a place where gentle stories help you leave behind the noise of the day and slowly drift into a peaceful sleep. Each soft, soothing narration is designed to relax your mind, release tension, and guide you to a deeper sense of calm within. If you enjoy the experience, don't forget to like and subscribe to stay with Relax Story every night. And feel free to leave a comment to share your thoughts or suggest a story you'd love to hear. Now close your eyes, take a deep breath, and let Relax Story guide you into a restful deep sleep. A morning unfolds over the plains of East Africa in a 21st century that has never known Homo sapiens, where the first light of day slips across vast stretches of land as though it has done so for millions of years without the need for witness, spilling over grasslands that run unbroken to horizons reminiscent of the Serengeti and the Great Rift Valley, where no paved roads cut through, no power lines stretch into the distance, no engine sound intrudes upon the breathing rhythm of the planet, where everything endures as an untouched structure, unaltered and unclaimed, with scattered acacia trees like quiet marks upon a field of yellowed grass, where wet seasons and dry seasons take turns rewriting the surface of the earth in cycles slow yet precise, where morning mist holds the light like a thin veil, where the wind glides over the ground in soft waves so gradual it seems even time itself has chosen to move at their pace. And within that entire expanse there is no trace of humankind, no sound, no structure, no remnant, only the presence of a world unnamed yet complete in its own way, as though such absence were not emptiness, but another form of fullness. From that stillness, life emerges not as a surprise but as an inevitability, as herds of Loxodonta africana move across the grasslands with steps heavy yet steady, each step pressing the earth enough to bend it, enough to carve unseen paths that will one day become trails for countless other creatures, their great ears not merely form but function, exchanging heat with the air, a means of enduring in a world without shelter, without architecture, only harshness and adaptation, while beneath the shade of an acacia, a pride of Panthera, Leo lies motionless like living stone, unhurried, not in pursuit, only watching, as though patience itself were a form of power, keeping prey populations from ever exceeding what the land can bear. And along the edge of a river, groups of primates move back and forth, trading glances, sounds, gestures, a form of intelligence present yet never gathered into symbols, never carried beyond the boundary of the present into something called history. While above them, slow circles of vultures carve through warming air. They do not create death yet are always present when it comes, closing cycles with a precision that needs no awareness. All these movements, from ground to sky, bound together into a network without any guiding hand, a self-sustaining balance, without command, without center, without intention, yet still in motion. A river continues its course through the valley, bending with the land, reflecting light along the path of the sun, yet no one has given it a name. A mountain range stands in place, formed through millions of years of geological collision, yet no map has ever traced its shape. The sky turns, the stars move along paths so exact they could be predicted if only someone watched long enough, yet no symbol is written, no history recorded, no memory carried beyond the span of a single life. The planet continues to function under the full weight of its physical and biological laws, Yet something thin and invisible is missing, the layer of language, of concept, of the idea that all of this might be called a world. The Earth does not pause with that absence, it does not slow, it does not empty, it continues along its orbit, circling an ordinary star in a quiet corner of the galaxy, allowing species to compete, to survive, to vanish, to evolve, letting environmental pressures shape the smallest traits across thousands of generations. Yet no species rises beyond that chain to see itself as an exception. No being claims ownership. No voice places itself above the rest. A world complete, yet belonging to no one. And as everything continues in that manner, a question begins to take form, not within that space, but within the human imagination of it, whether, if Homo sapiens had never appeared, intelligence would have vanished from this planet, or whether it would persist in other forms, waiting along a path never taken to become what humans once called awareness. Around 300,000 years ago, in the late Middle Pleistocene, Africa was not the stage of a single species quietly advancing toward the future, but a vast continent where multiple human lineages coexisted, moved, and adapted within a world that never ceased to change beneath their feet. Across East Africa, southern regions, and wider scattered landscapes, different populations of the genus Homo lived among valleys, grasslands interwoven with woodland, seasonal lake margins, and ecological corridors that opened and closed with the rhythm of climate. In actual history, from that complex web, the branch leading to Homo sapiens gradually appears in the fossil record, not as a destined outcome, but as a fragile possibility rising among many others. Late Homo erectus remained the long shadow of a resilient past, a species that had endured across vast stretches of time, walking upright with stability, shaping stone tools, surviving in diverse environments. Alongside them were archaic Homo populations across Africa, sometimes placed near Homo heidelbergensis in debates over modern human origins. Yet the boundary between them was never a clean division, but more like layers of sediment settling upon one another in a river of evolution that never stood still. Around them, lions crossed the grasslands, leopards vanished into shadow, hyenas lingered at the edge of hunts, great apes observed the world through eyes ancient beyond measure. All of it unfolding within an Africa that never held still for long, where cycles of wet and dry, shifting rainfall, prolonged droughts and shortened seasons continuously rearranged water, vegetation, prey, movement routes, habitats, and the limits each population could endure. In actual history, one branch passed through that maze. In this version, it does not. History need only bend slightly. No meteor tears the sky, no flood engulfs a continent, no blazing horizon marks an end of days. Around those 300,000 years ago, through cycles of rain and drought, a longer stretch of aridity than usual may have caused seasonal water sources to shrink earlier. Shallow lakes retreat into cracked mud, streams thinning into threads of silver through withered grass. Vegetation shifts. Food does not vanish entirely but becomes more erratic, scattered, uncertain, like a map of survival erased piece by piece with each passing dry season. A small population close to the lineage that would have led to modern humans may begin to weaken, not in a single moment, but across a chain of brief generations, as disease, parasites, malnutrition, and slightly lower survival rates of the young gradually erode their demographic foundation. With less water, greater distances, and sparser food, competition among human groups sharpens. While those forced into open terrain face greater exposure to predators, evolution rarely closes doors with thunder. It closes them through accumulation. One harsher season, fewer young surviving, a handful of breeding individuals lost, a thinning network of exchange, an advantage that once existed becoming no longer enough. And so, in this imagined world, the branch that might have led to Homo sapiens never achieves the stability required to expand, to connect, to pass on increasingly complex forms of culture. It does not vanish like a collapsing city, for at that time, no cities yet existed to fall. It disappears before it can become a world. Other archaic human populations may persist for a time, crossing different plains, tending fires in different places, leaving stone tools buried in the earth like fragments of memory without words. Yet none crosses the threshold that once gave rise to modern humans in actual history. No community grows resilient enough to sustain deep symbolic traditions across long spans of time. No network of tool exchange stretches far enough between distant groups for ideas to move beyond a single valley. No cave art of the modern kind develops into a lasting system of symbols. No burial rituals deepen into complex social memory where the living carry the dead within thought. And from that memory construct meaning, other great apes remain, a quiet reminder that intelligence has never worn a single form, yet at that moment, no branch is broad enough, stable enough, connected enough to open the door once opened by Homo sapiens. History shifts almost imperceptibly. There is scarcely a sound. When that branch ends, the earth does not follow it into stillness. Climate continues to change, rivers continue to flow, mountains continue to erode under rain, forests advance and retreat with cycles of moisture and drought. Animals are born, hunt, reproduce, die, leaving bones in the soil and footprints in the mud. Homo sapiens never appears, and with that absence comes no modern humanity, no human language as it is known, no hand to continue the story of the planet through symbols, metallurgy, wheels, fields, cities, and industrial smoke. From that small divergence, everything that follows is altered. Africa remains filled with great beasts. Continents never grow cities of light. The atmosphere never takes on the heavy breath of factories, and evolution continues its quiet experiments along other branches, unaware that a rare possibility has just faded. From that moment, Africa ceases to be the cradle of human civilization. It becomes a continent where megafauna, predators, and primates remain at the center of a world that has never been named. From roughly 300,000 to 100,000 years ago, across the open savannas, the riverine forests, the great inland lakes, the semi-arid lands, and the desert margins that shrank and spread with the rhythm of climate, Africa continued to change with each season, each century, each thin layer of soil pressed beneath the passing herds. Yet that change was no longer bent or steered by a two-legged species that knew fire, that raised settlements, that cleared land, that turned landscape into a map of its own will. The rain still came and withdrew. Drought still stretched across the grasslands. Natural fires still swept through dry brush like the continent's own hot breath. Lake levels still rose and fell, leaving behind mud, salt, young grass, and old shorelines like the memory of a restless planet. But there were no expanding fields passed down through generations, no fences, no roads cutting across migration corridors, no organised hunts with the weapons of modern humans. Africa did not become the cradle of civilization in the familiar sense, yet it did not grow poorer. It simply remained itself, a vast ecological space, breathing with the rains, drying with the droughts, opening with grass, closing with brush, then stirred awake again by the footsteps of great beasts. Within that wide network, no creature touched the earth as persistently as the African savanna elephant. With their immense bodies, their herds moving along paths repeated across many seasons, with appetites large enough to turn sparse woodland into brighter, more open ground. Elephants did not merely inhabit the landscape, they helped shape it. They snapped young trees, broke branches, scarred trunks, preventing the canopy from ever fully closing, allowing light to fall to the ground, allowing grasses to rise, allowing other herbivores to find space between clusters of trees. They left trails through thicket, through soft soil, through the edges of water, and those trails did not belong to them alone. In time, they became pathways for antelope, buffalo, predators, scavenging birds, insects, and countless smaller lives. In the dry season, when water sank deep into the earth or lingered only in rare muddy hollows, elephants could dig, widen, disturb what little moisture remained. And from those heavy footprints, other life found a narrow door through which to continue. Seeds passed through their bodies and fell upon distant ground, while their weight and feeding kept grasslands and open woodland from being swallowed whole by brush. Without modern humans directing fire and land at large scales, elephants became one of the continent's steady hands, opening the earth, allowing it to close, then opening it once more. Yet a grassland truly lives only when it does not stand still, when each herd must listen to the shifting of grass, when each step carries the chance of being seen, singled out, pursued. On the savannah, lions held a quiet but constant pressure, not only in the moment of the charge, but in their very presence across space. They watched herds of zebra, antelope, buffalo, and other hoofed animals, seeking the young, the old, the weak, the straying, the thin places in the moving fabric of the herd. Because of lions, prey could not graze forever in one place. Because of lions, herds had to scatter, gather, turn, remain alert, rest uneasily, move on before a patch of grass was eaten down to its root. Alongside them, spotted hyenas entered this network as another form of savanna intelligence, not merely following carcasses, not merely waiting for remnants, but hunting, contesting, cooperating, pressing the young and the weak, then clearing what remained so that flesh, bone, scent, and energy returned to the soil. The savannah was no gentle paradise. It was an order drawn tight as a bowstring. And yet, not all of Africa's intelligence took the shape of fang, claw, trunk, or bodies heavy as mountains. In riverine forests, along forest edges, where shade held moisture and fruit ripened with the seasons, chimpanzees moved in small groups, remembering which trees bore fruit, where food could be found, which individuals could be trusted, which must be avoided. They could use branches, sticks, stones, or simple objects to reach food, and more importantly, they learned from one another, holding behaviour within the community like fragments of memory passed through gaze and habit. Beyond those regions, baboons walk the savanna floor, along forest edges, near water, near refuge. Adaptable to the point of becoming a symbol of survival itself. An Africa without humans was not an Africa without intelligence. Intelligence remained in society, in memory, in learning, in vigilance. Yet no species wielded symbols, fire, and complex tools to rise and rewrite the biosphere according to its will. Africa, therefore, did not lose its central place in life simply because it did not give rise to human civilization. It did not become a continent of cities, of smoke, of straight lines and artificial borders. It became a continent where great beasts continued to write order with their footsteps, with their trails, with grazed grass, with broken trees, with hunts at dusk, and with the tense silence before a herd burst into motion. That ecosystem was richer in megafauna, more continuous, less fragmented, less burdened by organised hunting, and from that ground, the story began to spread beyond Africa, for without modern humans leaving this land, Europe, Asia, and even Australia would enter history along an entirely different path. From roughly 100,000 to 50,000 years ago, in the true history of Earth, Africa was not only a continent, but a threshold, a point of biological departure from which groups of Homo sapiens gradually moved outward, along West Asia, the Middle East, the coasts, the dry corridors opened by shifting climate, then deeper into the vast spaces of Eurasia. But in this world, that threshold never opened. The evolutionary branch that would have led to Homo sapiens ended earlier, quietly, like a river vanishing beneath the earth, leaving behind not an unfinished civilization, but a vast emptiness in the biological history of the planet. There were no modern humans leaving Africa, no first steps across desert margins, no successive waves spreading into West Asia, no meeting between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals, Denisovans, or other ancient human lineages that had lived beyond Africa longer than the memory of any species. Familiar history dissolved at its point of origin. Africa was no longer the launch point of a species capable of rewriting the global biological map. With that door closed, Europe and West Asia continued beneath a different sky, colder, wider, less disturbed by newcomers from the south, across windswept grasslands, within temperate forests shedding leaves with the seasons, along the Mediterranean edges, deep into West Asian valleys and into the transitional lands of Central Asia. Neanderthals remained among the most significant human-like beings of that landscape. Their bodies were strong, adapted to cold climates, accustomed to hunting under harsh conditions, to stone, bone, hides, caves, fire, long winters, days so short that light itself seemed a scarce resource. In real history, they encountered Homo sapiens, coexisted in certain regions, and were eventually replaced or absorbed into the genetic stream of modern humans in complex ways. But here, there was no wave of Homo sapiens sweeping into Europe or West Asia. No direct competition with a species bearing broader social networks. More flexible symbolism. Greater capacity to spread. Neanderthals could remain longer, at least in the short and medium term, like an old flame continuing to burn within a cold cave. Yet the absence of modern humans did not grant them certain dominion over the future. Climate still shifted. ice still advanced and retreated. Food still vanished with the seasons. Their internal limits remained, like stone beneath snow. Further east, the picture grew more indistinct, as though history there were written in mist, in fragments of bone, in traces of genetic memory left behind by those who once walked the real world. Asia, from the mountains and caves where Denisovans left scattered evidence, to the cold steppes, Siberia, and the vast corridors of Eurasia, was no longer a pathway for Homo sapiens to press deeper into the east, no longer a stage for the spread of tools, fire, cooperative hunting, and symbolic culture in the modern human form. Denisovans, that mysterious yet significant lineage, could continue to exist in their lands without being too quickly rewritten by a species from Africa. Around them, the northern landscapes remained filled with great bodies moving through the cold mammoths stepping slowly across the tundra, woolly rhinoceroses lowering their heads against the wind, ancient bison moving in herds, giant deer carrying antlers like fossilized branches. It was not a peaceful world. It was a world heavy, cold, alive, where vast biomass still moved with the seasons, where hunger still hunted the living, where winter could kill more than any predator. But without Homo sapiens, that balance was not further tilted by a species that could carry fire across distances, remember roots, pass down hunting knowledge through generations, turn land into a network of tracks, traps, shelter, and memory. Farther south, across boundaries of sea, climate, and deep biology, Australia emerged as a continent never touched by that migration. In true history, modern humans arrived early, and their presence became inseparable from the prehistoric story of that land. But in this alternate reality, ancient shores bore no human footprints. The dry interior held no rising smoke of human camps at dusk. The grasslands carried no hunting routes stretched from one season to the next. Australia's great marsupials and its native megafauna, which once made the continent a distinct evolutionary world, were not immediately subjected to the pressures brought by Homo sapiens in real history. This did not mean that every species would survive forever, for the late Ice Age climate still shifted, drought could still spread, ecosystems could still fracture under the weight of natural change. But one thing was different. There were no human footprints upon Australian sand. No bands crossing frozen thresholds to expand the map of survival. No human fires burning in Siberian nights. The familiar history of humanity seemed withdrawn from the surface of the planet, leaving behind an Earth broader, colder, more empty, yet far from lifeless. When Homo sapiens did not spread beyond Africa, many continents entered their next ages without ever being shaped by modern humans. The Ice Age still came, ice still expanded, climate remained harsh, but the great beasts faced nature alone, without the added presence of a hunter that carried fire, traps, and collective memory alongside them. Between roughly 50,000 and 12,000 years ago, as the final phase of the Pleistocene slowly drifted toward the threshold of the Holocene, Earth remained a cold, vast, and unforgiving world, even in a history where Homo sapiens never came to be, across North America, Eurasia, Siberia, and Australia. Cold grasslands stretched beneath grey skies. Frozen steppes opened like seas of stiffened grass, and the edges of great ice sheets ground silently against stone and soil, while arid chill forced life to move with the seasons, with water, with the last surviving bands of vegetation in a world that never stood still. Ice still covered much of the northern hemisphere. Temperatures still fell low. Moisture in many regions still waned. The climate still wavered like the uneasy breathing of an ancient planet, as herds of great beasts faced seasons of hunger, shrinking corridors of survival, grasslands that vanished and returned, an environmental shock strong enough to erase entire bloodlines. This was not a gentler world for the absence of humankind. It simply lacked another force, a late but cutting one modern hunters bearing fire, traps, weapons cast from afar, domesticated dogs, and a shared memory able to follow the trail of a herd across many winters. The climate remained, but the equation had lost a blade. Within that absence, the greatest creatures of the north moved toward a different fate. Across the cold plains of Eurasia, Siberia, and parts of North America, woolly mammoths still wandered through snow and brittle grass, their bodies cloaked in thick fur, their curved tusks reaching forward like twin ancient moons, shaped to endure lands where most smaller life could only pass in trembling. Nearby, the woolly rhinoceros, heavy, low, and resolute, bore its great horns as it crossed the open cold of the Pleistocene like a breathing stone. In the true course of history, these species bore heavy pressure as the climate warmed, as vegetation shifted, as the dry, cold grasslands that sustained them gave way to forests, marshes, and landscapes no longer suited to their vast bodies. In this altered history, that pressure does not vanish. The seasons still turn, the ice still retreats, food still scatters, and familiar habitats still fracture. Yet there are no coordinated bands of humans to drive herds into disadvantage, no firelight to disturb the night, no spear cast from safety, no stories carried across generations of where mammoths pass when the snow begins to melt. That absence does not guarantee survival for all, but it widens the margin of time for some, softens the edge of extinction, prolongs the seasons of birth, the migrations, the young following their mothers across frozen grasslands. But the Ice Age is not written only in the shadow of elephant and rhinoceros. Beyond the oceans, in North America and Australia, other worlds of great beasts stand at their own fragile threshold between endurance and disappearance. On the American continent, giant ground sloths once left heavy footprints in soft earth, herbivores of a scale far beyond the familiar image of their kind. Across the plains and valleys of North America, the dire wolf, a great canid of the Pleistocene, once stood as a common presence in the fossil record, especially in places such as La Brea, where asphalt preserved the memory of a vanished world of predators. Alongside them moved other great hunters of the Ice Age, figures like the saber-toothed cats, once poised at the summit of strained ecological webs, where every carcass, every hunt, every lean season could decide the fate of many species at once. In Australia, Diprotodon, the largest marsupial ever known, together with giant kangaroos and other megafauna, once crossed semi-arid lands, open forests, and ancient grasslands before most vanished toward the end of the Pleistocene. Without the spread of modern humans, without the reach of organised hunting across continents, without the repeated collision between predatory intellect and slowly adapting colossal bodies, their fate may not have closed as swiftly as history remembers. Yet a world without humans is not a world freed from death. Climates that shift too quickly may still choke the corridors of life. Vegetation that transforms too deeply may still break the chain of sustenance. Species bound too closely to a single environment may still walk into extinction without a human hand ever touching them. The difference lies in pace. The difference lies in added pressure. The difference rests in the narrow space between a population in decline and one pushed beyond return. Within that narrow margin, the history of life may change its colour in countless ways. The Ice Age remains harsh. The ice still melts. The seas still rise. Forests still advance into former grasslands. Plains still contract. And many species still vanish like sounds swallowed by the horizon wind. Yet no human hand hastens those endings. The absence of Homo sapiens does not make nature gentle, does not save every great creature, does not turn Earth into an eternal sanctuary. It means only that a final blow may never have fallen. In such a history, the modern world might still carry shadows of the Ice Age in the north, herds of mammoths pressing their tracks through snow in the Americas, ground sloths leaving deep impressions in damp earth in Australia, giant marsupials lingering among sparse brush and dry light, living memories of an age thought lost. Earth may be wilder not because it is more peaceful, but because it is allowed to hold more great bodies, heavier movements, older presences within its ecological tapestry. And after those great herds pass through the Ice Age without fleeing a fire-wielding hunter, the next question is no longer who survives, but who will sow the first seed. In this world, perhaps no one will. Between roughly 12,000 and 8,000 years ago, as the last ice withdrew from many regions of Earth, warmer valleys, wetter alluvial plains, and riverbanks rich with silt began to open into a world that seemed to await transformation. Yet in this reality, no hand steps forward to change it. In Mesopotamia, between the great rivers of Southwest Asia, wild grasses still rise with the seasons. Wild wheat and barley still cast their seeds upon the ground as they have for uncounted generations. In the basin of the Nile, silt still arrives with the floods, laying down its fertile veil before receding in silence. Along the Yellow River, riverside vegetation still shifts with rain, wind, cold, and drought. In Mesoamerica, the wild ancestors of maize remain a small thread within the web of plants, insects, birds, and seed-eating creatures. In the high Andes, tubers, beans, and hardy plants still belong to slopes, crevices, valleys, mist, and stone. In true history, this is the age when Homo sapiens quietly crossed a threshold. From following food to creating it, from gathering what the seasons offered to keeping the better seeds, planting them again, remaining longer by water, storing sustenance, and slowly reshaping the land itself. But in this world, Homo sapiens never appeared. No one patiently selects grains that hold their seeds longer. No one sets aside the best for the next season. No one sees that a young animal kept beside a shelter may become the beginning of herds generations hence. The grasses that might have become the foundation of civilization remain only grasses. The seeds that might have fed cities fall into mud, are carried by wind, taken by birds, eaten by insects, or lie dormant until the coming rains. Without that selection, the foundation of agriculture is erased at its root, not by catastrophe, but by the absence of a chain of actions so small, so slow, so repeated across hundreds and thousands of seasons. There's no wheat chosen to cling longer to its stalk, easier to gather, richer in energy. No barley becoming part of a stable store. No rice in Asia drawn into widening fields of water across generations. No maize in Mesoamerica drawn from its wild form into a plant that sustains civilizations. No potatoes, beans, squash, millet, or other staples bound to the calendar of planting and harvest. No goats, sheep, cattle, pigs, or chickens gathered near dwellings, selected for gentleness, for growth, for breeding near human hands. There are no pens, no granaries, no surplus, no sowing, no harvest, no season of storing. The plants that might have become the crops of the world never leave the contest of nature among grasses, shrubs, seed-bearing plants, fungi, birds, rodents, insects, and grazing beasts. Alluvial plains do not harden into fields. Riverbanks are not cleared into long stretches of cultivation. Waterside forests do not retreat before axes, purposeful fire, and the need to expand the growing season. The landscape still changes, but its rhythm belongs to flood and drought, lightning and wildfire, the hooves of great animals, and the slow turning of the seasons. From this, the consequence spreads beyond seeds, into footsteps, flight paths, burrows, and the small populations close to the ground. Across wide grasslands, wild cattle and great herbivores still move in herds, grazing the grasses that rise after rain, departing when drought cracks the earth, returning when green again covers the horizon. Antelope still hold open migratory corridors, uncut by fields, unbroken by fences, unclaimed by settlements that turn water into centres of control. Horses, in a world without saddle, without cart, without chariot, without cavalry, remain creatures of wind, dust, young grass, and distance, crossing fertile lands without ever becoming instruments of transport or war. Seed-eating birds are not drawn into vast monocultures that spread like an artificial feast, nor do they gather around granaries and rooftops. They feed in scattered places, in brush, along river banks, across grasslands, in the open scars left by wildfire, where seeds appear unevenly. Unpredictably, as nature has always given them, rodents, seed-eating insects, and species that might have flourished around stored grain never enter an age of abundance, for there are no piled harvests, no warm enclosures, no settlements that offer food throughout the year. Their populations rise and fall with rain, cold, drought, predators, and disease. Without an economy of seeds, they build no small empires around them. Thus, the greatest revolution never to occur is a revolution without sound. Without agriculture, populations do not surge in the way that once thickened, scattered groups into settled communities. No seed quietly rewrites the destiny of the planet. No surplus feeds those who do not gather food themselves. No storehouse gathers time into power. No village rises by the river, then thickens into walls, into borders, into centres of rule, into the first cities. Earth does not enter an age of fields. It remains a planet of wet and dry seasons, of migratory corridors and great herds, of wild grasses, riverside forests, alluvial mud, the beating of wings over open land, and seeds that fall without carrying history. When no grain becomes the memory of civilization, no village kindles beside the river, and the night of Earth remains as dark as it was before the coming of humankind. From roughly 8,000 years ago, when the fertile valleys of Mesopotamia, the alluvial banks of the Nile, the vast plains along the Yellow River, and the Yangtze in the true course of history slowly held human beings in place, allowing them to store food, to build fixed settlements, and from there expand into cities. In this world, everything halts just before that threshold. There is no turning from wandering to dwelling, no granaries to sustain a lasting multitude, no need to raise walls, temples, stone bridges, or harbours, and so there is no Uruk, no Memphis, no Chang'an, no Rome, no Tenochtitlan, no London or New York. There are no sharp horizons of concrete and glass cutting into the sky. No webs of light laid out like artificial veins across the surface of the planet. Every river basin, every coastline, every potential crossroads of trade remains only a place where water flows, where silt settles, where life gathers and disperses with the seasons. For there exists no social condition, no food system, no infrastructure from which a city might ever be born. A planet without a skyline is not empty, but one that has never been given the chance to be filled by the architecture of humankind. And when cities have never existed, what disappears is not merely brick and electric light, but the deep transformations that would have quietly unfolded beneath the soil, within the waters, and along the edges of the land. The great rivers still wind along their own courses, unforced into straight lines, unbound by artificial embankments, unbroken by barriers built at the scale of a civilization. Floodwaters still spill across the plains, carrying silt, then retreat, leaving behind layers of sediment that thicken across centuries. Wetlands are not drained, not filled to make way for construction, but remain in their half-water, half-earth state, where roots sink into mud, where water birds descend with the rhythm of the tides, where life does not require a fixed form. Along the coasts there are no ports, no piers, no bands of light stretching through the night like luminous cuts along the edge of continents. There remains only the blurred outline of sand, stone, mangrove forests, and river mouths where fresh water meets the sea, where mud gathers where it must, where the tides still breathe with the rhythm of the moon, unbroken. The planet is not fixed in place by concrete and roads. Water follows its own path, land shifts by its own force. The boundary between land and sea is not a rigid line, but a living threshold, ever changing, ever in motion, and within these spaces never claimed, the rhythms of many species begin to follow other trajectories, sometimes for no reason other than the night sky is no longer lit. Flocks of migratory birds still cut across the night sky, along routes etched into biological memory over tens of thousands of years. They navigate by the stars, by the Earth's magnetic field, by subtle signals carried in the air that artificial lights have never disturbed. There are no unnatural zones of brightness to pull them from their course, no invisible ecological traps that draw them down at the wrong place, the wrong time. The sky returns to being its own original map. Below, the beaches open in natural darkness, where mother turtles crawl ashore at night, dig their nests, lay their eggs, and slip silently back into the sea, unhesitating, unconfused between the horizon and the glow of coastal lights. When the hatchlings emerge, they too find the ocean as their ancestors did long before any city existed, drawn toward the faintest light, toward the reflection of the moon upon the water, along estuaries and coastlines. Fish, seabirds, and predators move with the tides, with the seasons, with the cycles of the moon, unbroken by piers or sea walls, undisturbed by light that burns through the night. On land, great herds travel hundreds of kilometers without encountering fences, without being halted by highways, without being split apart by dense settlements. Ecological corridors stretch like invisible roads linking habitats, and all these movements, from the paths of flight in the sky to the currents below the water and the tracks across the earth, slowly converge into a single image, slow, deep, and almost still. The night of Earth remains a true night. There is no network of lights outlining continents from orbit, no glowing strands along the coasts where millions once stayed awake, no clusters of brightness marking centers of power, of commerce, of industry. There is only darkness stretching across oceans, forests, deserts, and mountain ranges never cut through. Within that darkness, moonlight glides across the water, meteors fall through the atmosphere, lightning flares and vanishes in an instant. At times a natural wildfire rises and fades. At times a volcano glows from deep within the earth. Night is not driven away but returned to the oldest sources of light on the planet. And in that darkness, the planet is not empty. It is filled with flight paths, swimming routes, migratory corridors, rhythms of reproduction unfolding quietly, continuously, with a subtlety never measured, never named. When the night of Earth remains dark, what remains to be seen is no longer what once burned upon the surface, but what has never been ignited deep beneath the ground. From around the year 1750 in the true history of Earth, a very young transformation began upon a very old planet. In a few early industrial regions, the first coal fires burned not merely as signs of technique, but as small doors opening into a store of energy buried for millions of years beneath rock, beneath ancient swamps, beneath layers of sediment that had once been forests, living beings. Sunlight turned into carbon within the depths of the earth. Then coal drew with it oil, gas, cement, railways, automobiles, aircraft, ships, factories, an entire network of engines spreading from one continent to another, until the smoke that first rose from industrial cities became a global signal in the atmosphere, in the oceans, in the polar ice, within the carbon cycle of the biosphere. In only a few centuries, a single species did what volcanoes, oceans, and ancient forests would do across vast spans of time, returning carbon to the sky, but at a speed too great, too dense, too concentrated. In a world without Homo sapiens, that door is never opened in such a way. There are no factories glowing red in the night, no automobiles filling urban valleys, no aircraft carving paths through the clouds, no modern fleets crossing oceans on heavy oil. No one digs into the depths to gather ancient energy and release it in a sudden flood back into the air. Coal remains in the rock. Oil remains in its geological traps. Gas remains locked beneath silent layers. The climate does not stand still, but it is not grasped by a single species and driven faster. Earth has always known how to change, Ice can still advance and retreat across long cycles. Volcanoes can still cast ash into the sky. Ocean currents can shift their rhythm. Forests can expand and withdraw with rain, heat, fire, and time. A living planet is never a fixed image hung in darkness. It breathes through the oceans, trembles through geology, sheds its skin through climate, and rearranges itself through changes so slow that a lifetime cannot fully perceive them. Yet in this imagined reality, without the modern thrust of fossil fuels, without the rapid rise of greenhouse gases driven by industry, without the chemical acceleration in the oceans caused by human emissions, that rhythm of change may become slower, colder than the present, less forced away from the baseline oscillations that have guided the planet for hundreds of thousands of years. This does not make Earth perfect, it only makes it different. A sky not flooded with too much carbon in too short a time will not erase storms, droughts, natural ice melt, or local collapses of ecosystems. It merely removes a particular layer of pressure, one born of engines, furnaces, smokestacks, and cities that consume ancient energy as though the Earth were an endless reservoir. That difference appears most clearly not in abstract numbers, but in fragile places where a slight rise in heat, a touch of acid, a small loss of ice can reshape an entire system. Beneath shallow seas, coral reefs still live in a delicate world where water temperature, clarity, acidity, and currents determine the colour of an entire small kingdom. They can still be broken by storms, weakened by disease, altered as natural conditions shift. Yet without industry, they bear less of the added burden of modern heat, and are less driven into a chemically altered ocean by human carbon. Coral is not granted immortality. It is given time. At the cold edges of the planet, where sea ice is not scenery but foundation, the difference is even clearer. Polar bears must still hunt. Seals must still survive between dark water and white ice. Seabirds must still follow the changing seasons of fish. Yet if summer ice does not retreat rapidly under industrial warming, species bound to the ice edge are not forced to adapt at a pace too abrupt. Nothing here remains forever stable, for the Arctic has never been a motionless world. But the boundary between survival and loss is not drawn back so swiftly as in true history. On land, the great forests take on another form. Boreal forests still burn when dry seasons stretch long. Tropical forests are still shaped by storms, disease, competition for light, and the slow aging of life. But they are not bound into a global network of extraction by chainsaws, logging roads, ports, paper mills, and transcontinental markets. Ancient trees still fall and return to the soil. The canopy still opens to light for new generations. Carbon still moves through roots, leaves, fungi, soil, and decay, not as a line stripped bare, but as a long breath of the biosphere. When coral, ice, forests, and sky are drawn together, the shape of a world without industry begins to emerge, colder, slower, less bent by a single force. Earth still changes its climate, but no single species uses factories and engines to hasten that change. It may hold its ice longer, keep its forests more intact, keep its oceans less rapidly altered in chemistry. Yet it does not become a paradise. It remains wild, severe, uncertain. Greener does not mean simpler. When the atmosphere is not driven off course by industry, a deeper question rises from that very green without humans. Is Earth truly greener, or only wilder in ways far more difficult to foresee? The first answer is yes, yet that yes opens only the first door to a far more intricate world, in that imagined present where Homo sapiens never stepped out of the shadow of evolution to raise fields, villages, and cities, then drape the planet in networks of roads, mines, and industrial smoke. Many lands would indeed hold a deeper green, wider, more unbroken. The Amazon might stretch like a vast damp lung, less fractured. The Congo might keep its dense and shadowed forests, where light must fall through many layers of leaves before it touches the ground. Southeast Asia might still bear long chains of rainforest, flowing from mountains down to the plains. North America might retain more wetlands, grasslands, and transitional forests uncut by lines, and Siberia might still open into cold, expansive boreal woods, where conifers stand in the wind like dark pillars amid an ocean of snow and moss. At first glance, the earth would be greener, but greener does not mean gentler. Greener does not mean more uniform. Nature has never simply laid leaves over everything like a quiet blanket. It knows how to burn, to open, to collapse, to grow again, to contest every patch of light, every stream, every empty ground with the weight of trunks, hooves, teeth, fire, storm, and time. Even without axes, saws, or bulldozers entering the forest, the surface of the planet would not lie still beneath its own green. In Africa, elephants would still move through savannas and open woodlands as colossal architects of vegetation, using trunks to pull branches, tusks to break thickets, and their sheer mass to open spaces where light falls and grass returns. They do not destroy the landscape in any simple sense. They make it breathe, keep forests from sealing entirely, allow grass and trees to hold an ongoing dialogue through rains, dry seasons, and generations of herbivores. Along northern streams, beavers would still drag wood, raise dams, slow water, turning narrow currents into shallow ponds, into marshes, into wet grounds where insects, fish, waterfowl, and shrubs press close for space. A single animal may bend the course of a stream. A colony may reshape a valley. Across the grasslands of North America, bison would still move in herds, grazing, pressing the soil, opening paths through brush, keeping the land from quickly closing into forest. In drier regions, antelope and other large grazers would pass like the moving pulse of ecosystems, feeding, running, breeding, dying, and returning their bodies to the earth. Above all these movements, lightning would still split the dry sky, setting fire to grass, to fallen leaves, to trees that have waited too long in heat. Fire is not only destruction. In many ecosystems, it is the ancient memory of renewal. Add to that picture storms sweeping through tropical forests, long droughts across grasslands, volcanic eruptions laying ash over valleys, natural wildfires reopening the sky after decades of dry accumulation, and the image of a greener earth begins to change its shape. It no longer resembles a perfect garden tended by a gentle, invisible hand. It resembles a living body, a body that ceaselessly scratches itself, heals itself, expands and contracts, where every beauty is paired with collision, every forest with competition, every wetland with water held back, land flooded, trees fallen, and other forms of life finding their chance in what remains. Without humans, Many forests would surely be wider and less cut, yet not every place would become forest. Many wetlands might spread further without being drained for cities. Many grasslands would endure, shaped by hooves, teeth, fire, and the rhythms of rain and drought. Some places might even be more chaotic, for no single species would force the planet into the straight lines of fields, the grey streaks of roads, the rigid blocks of cities. The Earth would not necessarily be kinder. It would simply not be governed by one species. And so the result is neither a simple green paradise nor a silent world outside history. In that imagined present, the Earth might indeed be greener in many places, for forests would not be pressed back by agriculture, fields would not spread across centuries, industry would not strip away the living layer as it has in reality. Yet at the same time, it would be wilder almost everywhere, for large animals would still carve paths, beavers would still hold water, winds would still strike through forests, fire would still redraw grasslands, and climate would still shift to rhythms that ask no permission from civilization. That world would not be simpler, nor more uniform, nor more gentle. It would only be more self-governed. And from that autonomy, another question begins to rise, slower and deeper when no single species bends the world to its will. Within that wildness, which creature stands closest to the threshold of intelligence? On an Earth without Homo sapiens, if one were to search the planet for the creature that stands closest to entering a more complex form of intelligence, the gaze would almost certainly return to the humid forests of Central and West Africa, then drift toward their edges where woodland opens into savanna, where chimpanzees, pan-troglodytes, still live in small communities dense with social ties, memory, conflict, alliance, learning, and habits passed from one generation to the next. They are not remarkable merely for their closeness to humans on the tree of evolution, but because in their daily lives there already exist familiar fragments, an infant growing slowly under the watch of its group, an adult remembering who aided it and who threatened it, a community capable of cooperation, rivalry, patience, imitation, trial and error, then turning experience into repeatable behavior. In their hands, a branch is not only a branch, a stone not only a stone. It may become a tool to gather termites, to crack nuts, to unlock food sealed within hard shells, even, in some savanna dwelling groups, to aid in hunting small vertebrates. This is not yet technology in the human sense, but it is a sign, a very near sign. That nearness would deepen in a world untouched by human division. In the present reality, many chimpanzee populations are pressed back by deforestation, habitat degradation, hunting, disease, agriculture, roads, resource extraction, and the continual expansion of human space. Forests once connected have been broken into fragments, like an ecological fabric cut into too many pieces for the memory of a species to travel intact. But in this imagined world, there are no mechanized axes widening farms, no paved roads slicing through corridors, no mines severing habitats, no hunters forcing them into narrower, darker, more unstable refuges. Populations might be larger, territories more continuous, small traditions, from how stones are chosen, how branches are used, how food is found and processed, how a difficult environment is navigated, might have more time to take root within communities. at the forest edge where it meets the savanna, where the climate is drier, shade thinner, water and food less predictable. The pressure of survival might drive behavior into greater diversity, urging memory, cooperation, and tool use a few steps further up the long ladder of adaptation. Yet at the very point where possibility seems to open most widely, limitation appears just as clearly. Chimpanzees may travel farther in a broader world, but their bodies and lives are still written in the language of trees, of canopy, of cover, of places to build nests when darkness falls. Even those living within savanna landscapes do not truly leave the forest. They still require patches of trees, riverine corridors, shelters for rest, for shade, for safety. Their hands are dexterous, yet the path of making remains short. Their tools are clever, yet largely remain branches, stones, natural objects selected and used within a narrow range. They can learn, but there's no clear sign of a long chain of material accumulation where each generation does not merely repeat but builds upon the last, until tools become systems, systems become techniques, and techniques become civilization. Another boundary, greater still, lies in fire. There is no evidence that chimpanzees control fire. And without fire, there is no key to many doors once opened in human history cooking food, transforming materials, extending activity into night, softening the rigid world so that intelligence may shape it in new ways. Even if they grasp better than most creatures, even if they choose tools and learn from one another, they may still be held back by the familiarity of behavior, by the way a tool, once used, locks itself into its old purpose. Thus chimpanzees matter not because they will surely become another version of humankind, but because they place the question at a distance too close to ignore. They have society, they have memory, they have learning, they have tools, they carry small seeds of tradition, but evolution is not a straight road toward intelligence, not a ladder waiting for the next species to climb, not a promise that given enough time another mind will raise cities, kindle fire, and name the stars. Chimpanzees may stand very near the threshold of complex intelligence, yet nearness does not mean crossing. They are the strongest candidate, yet not enough to become a second humanity. And that is what deepens the question. Intelligence may come very near, may brush the edge of possibility, may glimmer in a hand holding a stone at dusk in the forest, and still remain there, like a dawn that never becomes day. If the closest candidate to humans is still held back by forest, body, and fire, then the question must leave the ground, turning towards smaller, swifter, stranger minds, where crows, ravens, and parrots may reveal intelligence in an entirely different form. When one leaves the ground behind, the question of intelligence also departs from the familiar human form. For in a world without cities, without roofs, without wires, without landfills or human-made perches, the sky does not grow poorer. It simply returns to an older trial, wider, purer. There, ancient forests layer themselves in leaves upon leaves. Islands hold fast to their unbroken shores. Cliffs remain uncut by tunnels, and cleaner coasts unfold into intricate chains of life. Mountains, woods, wind, carcasses, seeds, calls, and migrations together become a vast laboratory for minds that have no hands, yet still observe, remember, choose, and adapt. From that imagined present, should time flow onward for millions of years more, Intelligence need not rise from primate fingers, nor from an upright stance upon open plains. It may just as well grow among branches, within crevices, upon ridges above wind-beaten shores, where crows, ravens, and parrots reveal something quiet yet profound. Higher cognition may arise within a body wholly unlike our own. Within that sky, crows and ravens of the Corvidae appear as cool observers of the landscape. They do not rule by size, nor hunt by brute force, but by memory, flexibility, and an ability to read a moment as swiftly as a shadow passes over the ground. They remember where food once lay, recognize danger, learn from one another, adjust their choices to the shifting scene, test, fail, and test again, as though each forest edge, each rocky shore, each carcass upon the highlands were a problem waiting to be solved. Some corvids stand out for their use of tools, most notably the New Caledonian crow, often invoked as a striking example that the handling of objects is not the province of primate hands alone, but may also emerge through beak, claw, memory, and a persistence honed by natural selection. Studies of working memory in corvids suggest that the avian brain is not merely a lesser version of mammalian intelligence, but another architecture altogether, efficient, condensed, suited to a life that must fly, must watch from afar, must decide swiftly within a world in constant change. Without cities, crows and ravens may lose lampposts, rooftops, and human refuse, yet they still inherit carcasses, coastlines, forest margins, cliffs, open grasslands, and the countless intersections of danger and opportunity, where those who remember better, learn faster, and see farther endure the longest. If corvids incline toward an intelligence of observation, trial, and resolution, then parrots open another path, lighter in form yet no less deep, an intelligence woven from sound, social memory, and signals that pass through the forest canopy. In the layered forests of a humanless earth, where leaves, rain, insects, wing beats, and calls overlap like an unseen map, parrots need neither stone nor fire to reveal their complexity. Their strength lies in learning sound, recognizing individuals, maintaining social bonds, and adjusting signals within vibrant communities. Their calls are not mere noise of the forest. They may serve as markers of identity, threads that bind a flock, means to keep distance, to find one another, to warn, to join, or to separate within a world where sound may matter as much as shape. Across vast stretches of time, on islands little disturbed, within forests left unbroken, in communities where social life becomes a steady pressure of selection. The intelligence of parrots may refine itself not into dwellings or machines, but into memory, tone, patterns of relation, and the ability to live within a network of ever-moving signals. Yet no matter how keen the minds of crows, ravens, or parrots may become, the body sets a quiet boundary that intelligence does not easily cross. Birds do not possess hands like primates. Beak and claw may grasp, pull, hold, break, even shape simple tools. Yet to build layered chains of tools, enduring structures, and to accumulate them across generations into architecture, metallurgy, machinery, or a material industry, that distance remains vast, like the span between a branch and a city. This is not a limit of intellect, it is a limit of form. Intelligence may not require hands to arise, yet to build a material civilization, the body itself becomes a kind of fate. Thus, in a world without Homo sapiens, the sky may still nurture cultures of behaviour, social traditions, keen memories, distinct calls, simple tools, and subtle forms of learning across generations of birds. Yet the path from these to architecture, industry, or complex material technology remains as distant as a horizon that never holds still. If intelligence may bloom upon branches and cliffs without ever reaching industry, then beneath the deep waters, where there is neither fire nor hand, the question grows stranger still. Beneath the sea, from warm and bright coastal waters to the cold darkness of the deep, from ice-covered poles to migrations that stretch like rivers of memory circling the globe, intelligence need not be built of stone, need not raise walls, need not leave metal upon the ground to prove that it once was. In that world, light fades after only a few layers of water, shapes dissolve into blue depths, distance grows wider than any plane upon land, while sound travels far, bending through layers, touching bodies, returning as an unseen map of space. Dolphins and whales dwell within a reality woven from clicks, whistles, pulses, brief signals, echoes that return from prey, from the sea floor, from the pod, from the dark. There, a mind need not carve symbols upon cave walls to declare its presence. It may exist within the rhythm of call and reply, in the way a pod holds itself across great distance, in the act of one recognizing another within an ocean so vast that all horizons vanish. Intelligence, born beneath water, may not resemble that of the hand. It may resemble a song more than a structure. The bottlenose dolphin stands as one of the clearest images of such a mind. It lives both near shore and far at sea, moving within fluid social groups, learning, playing, testing behaviours, adapting to a world that shifts around it with a supple, almost rhythmic grace. It needs no house to sustain its society. It carries society within movement, within sound, within echolocation, within signals that turn the sea from emptiness into a space of relation. The orca, the largest member of the dolphin family, draws this intelligence toward a sharper edge, where hunting becomes not merely strength, but strategy, coordination, tradition, and difference between populations. Some pursue fish, others hunt marine mammals, others preserve distinct methods of foraging as a form of identity carried through time, unwritten, unstamped, yet enduring like a path retraced across generations. The sperm whale draws the story deeper still, into realms of long dives, matrilineal groups, kinship bonds, and social traditions difficult to see with the eye, where sound serves not only to navigate but to bind a community within the blue-black darkness of the ocean. The humpback whale opens yet another form of memory song. In breeding grounds, males may sing a shared version of a song that spreads among them, a structure of sound that may last from minutes to more than a day, changing, travelling, echoing across waters as though the ocean itself were learning to remember through waves of sound. Taken together, these forms sketch a picture not of towers, streets, wheels, or furnaces, but of intelligence rooted in connection, sound, pursuit, tradition, and social memory. On an Earth without humans, such traditions would have more space to endure. There would be no whaling fleets tearing across seas through centuries of modern history, no large-scale military sonar, no industrial fishing nets laid across migration routes. No modern plastics drifting within the bellies of living beings. No constant mechanical noise thickening the ocean's acoustic field. Many populations of whales and dolphins might grow larger, steadier, less fragmented, migrations more continuous, signals, songs, and hunting traditions carried across quieter, cleaner, less broken seas. For humpback whales, history itself has shown that some populations were driven to declines of more than 95% by the 1970s, enough to imagine how the absence of humanity might leave a far more crowded ocean. Yet stillness does not turn into technology by itself. Water does not permit fire. Water makes tools difficult to craft, to preserve, to pass down across generations as an external store of knowledge. Water erases traces more swiftly than land, sweeps away softer materials, corrodes structures, closing many of the paths that once led humankind toward machinery and writing. Thus, a marine culture may be complex without cities, profound without libraries, ancient without monuments. It is here that the question widens beyond science alone. If an intelligence leaves no carved stone, raises no metal, inscribes no symbol upon the planet's surface, is it truly lesser? The ocean may hold deep minds, communities that learn, remember, transmit signals, preserve hunting practices, transform sound into a form of invisible heritage. The songs of humpback whales, the foraging traditions of orcas, the cultural structures of sperm whales, the fluid social lives of dolphins all suggest a quiet possibility. Culture need not turn to stone to be culture. A humanless Earth may still hold rich marine cultures, yet the archaeology of soil, bone, and tool would scarcely perceive them. And if beneath the sea there may exist intelligences that leave no monument, then upon the land there is yet another being that carries memory in its own way, not through script, not through machine, but through ancient paths that run across continents. From Africa to South Asia, from the wide grasslands where red dust clings to skin to the humid forests of Southeast Asia, elephants move as though the earth still remembers what came before maps, before borders, before the straight lines the human mind would one day draw across the world. In that imagined present, stretching further still into millions of years ahead, herds of African elephants, Asian elephants, and perhaps even some great relatives not driven out of history by human-scale hunting, continue to cross continents guided by a history unwritten, yet carried within the memory of the herd. An old matriarch does not lead by strength alone, but by the dry seasons she has walked through in her mind, by the water sources that once saved them all, by her memory of dangerous ground, of the long detours around barren land, of the moment one must leave before the grass burns gold beneath the sun. The young do not grow by milk alone, but by experience passed through footsteps, through low rumbles, through the closeness of bodies, through paths repeated so many years they seem to become the veins of the land itself. They have no script, but they have memory. That memory does not lie still within the brain, for every passing herd leaves behind a physical trace, a hollow pressed into soft earth, a corridor open through brush, a clearing in the thin forest, a path that other creatures may later follow as though discovering an answer written by massive bodies. Elephants break saplings, strip bark, damage or topple trees in certain contexts, not as blind destroyers, but as an ancient ecological force that prevents the landscape from ever fully closing in upon itself. Where shrubs might slowly consume the grass, they open space. Where savanna might be swallowed by dense woodland, they preserve shafts of light for grass, for antelope, for insects, for birds, for the smaller links in the web of life. Across many seasons, they carve and reuse long routes, trails that cross forest, riverbanks, dry lands, mineral licks, places where water lies hidden beneath the soil, or where salt and minerals rise like the pale bones of the planet. In a world without ivory hunting, without expanding agriculture, without infrastructure severing their corridors, without fences and guns breaking the continuity of spatial memory, elephant herds could grow larger, their journeys longer, the bond between the old and the young more enduring, like a living library that no fire ever consumes across generations. Yet it is precisely when elephants seem to approach most closely the idea of collective intelligence that a deeper question begins to unfold if intelligence is measured by the capacity to remember, to recognize, to bond, and to pass on experience. Elephants stand near its center, but if it is measured by technology, by refined tools, by architecture, by symbolic systems accumulated across generations, they stand on another shore. Elephants possess powerful memory, the ability to recognize individuals, deep social lives, complex responses to the bodies of their dead, and expressions that resist reducing them to mere masses of muscle crossing the plains. They know their bodies occupy space in the world. They understand obstacles. They grasp the relation between body and action. They know that a step, a trunk, a low call can shift the position of an entire herd, but the trunk, for all its astonishing flexibility, is not a hand precise enough to craft the long chains of small, refined tools that must be repeated and improved across countless generations. A body too large, a life cycle too long, a slow rate of reproduction, all grant endurance, yet also slow the path toward material technology. Elephant society is deep, but depth alone does not become a city. Thus the strangest truth about elephants lies not in whether they could become another version of humanity, but in how they reveal that intelligence may be vast along entirely different directions. If intelligence is memory, they stand very near. If intelligence is technology, they remain across a wide expanse of water. In a world without humans, they might carry deeper herd cultures, longer routes, broader ranges, clearer ecological roles. Yet there is not enough foundation to turn them into a material civilization waiting to awaken. There are forms of intelligence that raise no towers, forge no metal, send no machines into the sky, yet still hold the dry season in the mind, the path within the feet, the dead within the memory of the herd. This does not make them lesser, it only makes intelligence wider. If elephants are the collective memory of the land, then at a distant extreme of life, beneath the water, within the shifting darkness of the sea, there exists a form of intelligence almost opposite shorter-lived, more solitary, flashing into being and fading just as quickly, as elusive as a thought dissolving into the ocean. In rocky shelters along the shore, among quiet coral reefs and fractured seabeds, where light falls in faint blue shafts before dissolving into deeper water, the octopus appears as a form of intelligence that is immediate, tangible, and unlike any path life on land has ever taken. It requires no call echoing across the plains, No large herds moving together through many seasons. No prolonged social rituals to prove that within that soft body lies a remarkable awareness of the world. Its intelligence resides in the moment a limb touches a shell, in the way a sucker reads the surface of stone through touch and chemistry, in the way the body shifts colour, pattern, and form as though the sea itself were rewriting its shape upon living skin. In the octopus, the brain is not merely a cold command centre within the head, for the arms themselves take part in processing information, sensing position, probing objects, responding so that the body moves in concert with vision in purposeful motion. Judged by the ability to solve new problems, to learn quickly, to manipulate objects and conceal itself, the octopus seems to possess qualities that few other beings can claim. Yet that light burns largely within a single individual. It flares close to stone, to currents, to a narrow refuge, rather than spreading into a durable social web across generations. An octopus resting within its rocky den is anything but passive. Its arms glide across uneven surfaces, touching fragments of shell, narrow crevices, shifting currents, gathering the world piece by piece through contacts so subtle they verge on the invisible. This intelligence does not emerge as a song carried through a group, but as a chain of brief, precise decisions, constantly adjusted within a space very near at hand. It can pull, open, push, slip through, cling, test, withdraw, and return again, as though every object around it were a small question waiting to be answered by the body itself. Different individuals may approach the same problem in different ways, some cautious, some more curious, some quick to approach the unfamiliar, others patient before a sealed container of food. Intelligence here is not mere reflex, it has nuance, it has character. Camouflage renders that intelligence even more uncanny, for the octopus does not simply shift from one colour to another like cloth beneath light, but selectively adopts features of its surroundings, turning its body into a fragment of rock, a cluster of algae, a soft shadow pressed against the seafloor. In a complex environment where every surface bears its own colour, texture, brightness, and relief, disappearance is not a miracle, but an act of extraordinarily refined information processing. On an Earth without modern humans, without industrial fishing, without modern ocean pollution, without large-scale destruction bearing down upon reefs and coastal zones, those labyrinths of crevices, shelters, and natural objects might remain more stable, allowing some octopus populations to persist within rich material mazes of opportunity. Yet the closer one looks, the clearer the limits appear. The absence is not in the brightness of intelligence. It lies in time. It lies in society. The octopus does not exist in a universe entirely devoid of contact with its kind, for in certain conditions, some species may tolerate each other more than once imagined. Even so, their common foundation is not a broad, enduring, multi-layered society like that of chimpanzees, elephants, or whales, where the memory of one individual may pass into another, where the young have years to learn, where the experience of the previous generation still lives within the bodies of the next. Many octopus species live brief lives, reproduce once, and die, like a flame shaped by evolution to burn fiercely and then vanish. The female may tend her eggs with near absolute devotion, remaining with them, guarding, cleaning, maintaining the flow of water, often refusing to eat until her body is exhausted. It is a profound form of care, yet not a long schooling. It is a fierce sacrifice, yet not a prolonged transmission. That intelligence may flare within each short life, may solve immediate problems, may read the environment through skin, through arms, through the whole soft body, but it struggles to accumulate into collective memory, to solidify into lasting tradition, to become a cultural current extending through time. An individual octopus may be deeply intelligent, but a civilization requires memory that outlives a single brief existence. It is a thin yet profound divide, like the distance between a flash of lightning beneath the sea and a fire kept alive across generations. The octopus is not a failure of intelligence, it is proof that intelligence may arise in strange, beautiful, solitary, brilliant forms, and vanish before it can leave a legacy longer than the body that bore it. After chimpanzees, birds, whales, dolphins, elephants, and octopuses, the question is no longer merely which species is more intelligent, but what conditions must converge within the same world for intelligence to appear again and travel far enough. In a hypothetical future, millions of years from now, if the Earth continues to turn beneath the sun without ever bearing the footprints of Homo sapiens, the great question would no longer be which species is the most intelligent. It would not be whether chimpanzees, crows, dolphins, elephants, or octopuses might rise to dominance. The question would be what must come together for intelligence not merely to flicker within a single creature, not merely to appear as a strange act in a deep forest or a dark sea, but to accumulate, to be passed on, to expand, and to slowly become a complex culture. On a planetary scale, such a world would resemble a boundless evolutionary laboratory, where each ocean, each canopy, each distant island, each herd, and each flock holds a different potential. Intelligence is not a ladder laid from simple to complex. It is a rare turning. It opens only when many doors begin to move at once. When we separate intelligence into its conditions, we begin to see why so many species can reach toward it, yet so few travel far enough to turn it into history. The first condition is a society stable enough to learn, for any solitary invention, no matter how refined, can vanish with the final breath of the individual who created it. A chimpanzee that uses a twig, a crow that solves a problem, a dolphin that passes on a hunting method, an old elephant that remembers the path to water, all reveal that intelligence requires more than an isolated mind. It requires a living space where behavior can be seen, imitated, altered, and retained across generations. Chimpanzees possess alliances, social learning, and strong memory. Crows, ravens, and parrots display innovation, signal recognition, and the ability to learn from one another. Dolphins and whales preserve acoustic traditions and ways of living within their groups. Elephants carry the memory of the herd like an underground river flowing through generations. The octopus, despite its remarkable individual intelligence, stands far more alone in this equation, for a largely solitary life makes what it learns difficult to become a shared inheritance. The second condition is a childhood long enough for knowledge not to perish too soon. Complex intelligence requires time for the young to observe, to err, to touch the world, to fail, to begin again, and to slowly absorb the invisible paths left behind by those who came before. Longevity alone is not enough. A species needs an extended period of learning, a social environment patient enough to sustain it, and a wide gap between birth and independence so that experience may settle into skill. Chimpanzees and elephants hold an advantage here, as their prolonged youth places the young within a network of living memory. The octopus, by contrast, is like a brilliant but fleeting flare, capable of solving problems within its own lifetime, yet unable to turn those solutions into a current that flows across generations. Society and childhood can preserve knowledge, but for knowledge to touch the material world, the body must also find a way to cross the boundary between thought and matter. The third condition is the capacity to manipulate. It need not be a human hand, but it must allow a form of contact precise enough to grasp. Turn, separate, assemble, adjust, transform materials, and build sequences of action with increasing layers. Chimpanzees possess hands, strength, and the ability to use tools, yet the leap toward deeply cumulative technology remains constrained. Crows, ravens, and parrots have sharp memory and strong creativity, but beaks and claws narrow the path into complex material technologies. Dolphins and whales have society, sound, and communication, yet water does not hold fire, does not easily preserve tools, and does not allow materials to be transformed as land does. Elephants have flexible trunks, strength, and memory, yet the small, repeated, intricate actions required for layered craftsmanship are not their clearest advantage. The octopus, in contrast, possesses something like a soft hand divided into many arms, able to open, pull, twist, thread, and probe into the smallest crevices, yet it lacks a stable social foundation and a reliable intergenerational flow. One species may have memory but lack manipulation. Another may manipulate well but lack community. Another may communicate richly yet be constrained by its own environment. The fourth condition is a world that is difficult enough. If the environment is too easy, deep memory, creativity, and cooperation may not be rewarded strongly enough to advance. If it is too harsh, all that is learned may be erased after a single famine, a drought, or a violent shift in climate or food supply. Intelligence requires challenge, but also stability. It needs pressure, but also time. It needs problems to solve, but also a world that does not destroy every solution before it can be passed on. It is within this fragile balance that abilities such as remembering routes, recognizing allies, predicting prey, interpreting signals, cooperating in hunts, or protecting the young can slowly become the foundation for something greater. Yet even when society exists, childhood is extended, the body can manipulate, and the environment offers challenge. There remains a quieter condition beneath all thought, like bedrock beneath a forest energy. A large brain is costly. It requires food, transformation, an ecosystem rich enough to sustain not only muscle, bone, skin, and reproduction, but also an organ that constantly consumes energy to simulate the world within the darkness of the skull. A path toward complex intelligence cannot begin merely with being smarter. It requires long-term resources, a suitable diet, an environment stable enough that a large brain does not become an unbearable burden. In the human path, the control of fire marked a profound turning. For cooking transformed food, expanded access to energy, extended social life into the light, and gradually bound technology to daily existence. Another intelligence need not pass through fire in the same way, need not recreate the African savanna, need not produce agriculture, writing, or industry as a replica of Homo sapiens. Yet this is precisely what makes the path so difficult to repeat. Intelligence is not the destiny of evolution. It is a rare convergence of society, childhood, body, environment, and energy. No species stands as an inevitable successor, yet many carry fragments of what intelligence requires. One day, far beyond the present, it may arise from the forest, or from the sea, or from an island long isolated in time, or from a branch of life that now passes almost unnoticed. Once it is understood that intelligence is not an inevitable end, but only a rare turning, the next question becomes far quieter if there are no humans. How would such a world remember itself? No script carved into stone, no symbols pressed into clay, no maps unfolded to name rivers and mountains, no chronicles arranging events into years, no libraries holding the voices of vanished ages, no systems of science built by human hands to measure the sky, divide the soil, name the epochs, or record the shifting of a river's course or the retreat of a glacier. In that imagined present, caves remain dark, yet no hand leaves animals upon their walls. The shore receives its long waves, yet no one marks the old line of the tide. Deserts still move beneath the wind, mountains still stand within the cloud, forests still rise and fall in the damp breath of the seasons, yet no one reads them as text. No one deciphers them as evidence. No one gives names to what has come to pass. And yet the world does not cease to have a history simply because no one writes it. Mountains are still lifted by deep forces within the Earth's crust and worn down by rain, wind, and time. Rivers still bend. Building one bank and carving another, leaving behind their former channels like faint memories in the soil. Ice still advances and withdraws with the climate. Species still emerge, adapt, decline, and vanish. History continues to flow. It is simply no longer bound into pages, engravings, or glowing screens. When memory no longer resides in writing, it does not disappear. It moves into bodies that walk, that fly, that call across deep water, and that learn from those who have lived longer. Across the grasslands and open forests of Africa, elephants carry within their herds a kind of map without paper, where older individuals remember the paths to water in the dry season, recall the routes that once saved the herd through harsh years, know where to pass, where to avoid, and where life can be found after days of dust and heat. The young do not read maps, they follow. They learn through footsteps, through pauses, through repeated choices of the herd, until the path becomes part of the body, as though the land itself were held within living memory. In the ocean, whales hold a different kind of memory, not in ink but in sound that travels across distances too vast for the eye to measure. Songs change, are carried, received, altered, and continue to echo between distant populations, as though the ocean remembers through vibration. In the sky, migratory birds need no drawn boundary to know when to depart, which direction to follow, which coasts, river mouths, or waters will appear beneath their wings across long journeys. Some learn routes by following their parents, then remain faithful to those paths in later flights, turning the sky into a map without words. In the forest, primates observe, imitate, and pass on ways of selecting food, opening shells, using simple objects, living in groups, and surviving within a dense web of relationships. An individual dies, yet not all it knew dies with it. Something remains in the behavior of others. From these examples, the memory of the world appears not as a static archive, but as a continuing movement, softer than books, more fragile than carved stone, yet still enduring enough to outlast a single life. It lies in the trails elephants press through the forest, in the songs that drift beneath the sea, in the routes repeated across seasons, in the techniques of foraging passed through sight and gesture, in the small traditions that creatures preserve not because they know they are preserving history, but because such memory allows life to continue. The earth itself records in broader, slower ways. Mountain ranges hold the pressure of continents, rivers trace the slope of land, forests record climate in their advance and retreat, ice remembers cold and warmth in its expansion and thinning, species record environmental pressure in their forms, behaviours, calls, and disappearances. There is no written history, yet there is history in matter. No library, yet there are layers of soil. No chronicle, yet there are cycles of life. Perhaps history does not require books to endure. Perhaps it needs only a path walked long enough, a song carried far enough, a migration repeated often enough, a behaviour learned again before the one who knew it fades into the forest. A world without storytellers is not a world without meaning. It is only a world without storytellers in our language. It still lives, still remembers, still changes, still preserves what must be preserved through water, stone, blood, wings, voices, and the faint traces of footsteps beneath the canopy. And when the world remembers without words, the next question is no longer where that memory resides, but what such a planet would appear to be from beyond, from the darkness where no window of a city burns against the night. On a night in this imagined present, if a point of view could be placed in low orbit around Earth, not through the eyes of an astronaut, not through the lens of a craft, not through the signal of an artificial satellite, but as a silent vantage drifting beyond the atmosphere, the first thing that would appear would not be what exists, but what has vanished from the face of the planet. No ribbons of city light tracing the coasts like luminous veins, no electric web binding plains, river basins, ports, and industrial regions into a radiant map of night, no airfields blazing white in darkness, no squares, harbours, highways, factories, settlements, no shipping lanes leaving thin streaks of light across the ocean, and no metal objects cast into orbit by any civilization circling its home world. Where once there had been a map of human light, there would remain only a vast emptiness, deep as the ocean, soft as the darkness before dawn. For the beauty of this orbital view would not come from anything newly added, but from the fact that the familiar layer of modern light had never been lit at all. And yet, with artificial light gone, Earth would not become a dead, black mass. It would simply return the night to older sources of light, slower, humbler, but far deeper. Across the oceans, cloud bands would still turn with the wind, laying pale veils upon the water like the cold breath of the atmosphere, a reminder that the planet moves at every second. Even when no city below gives a storm its name, at the poles, Ice would catch the moonlight and the faint glow from space, reflecting a cold, distant sheen, almost beyond life, and yet still part of it. Somewhere upon the continents, a natural wildfire would rise in the dry season, small from orbit, yet enough to stir the darkness for hours or days. Along a volcanic belt, lava would glow like the warm blood of stone, a geological pulse echoing from the deep crust. Within dense clouds, lightning would flare and vanish, lighting the atmosphere for a moment too brief to hold. Near the polar regions, auroras would sometimes spread like a thin curtain, where charged particles from the sun meet the upper air and turn the sky into a motion of light without any guiding hand. From afar, the planet would seem darker, more primal, but not poorer. It would lack the light a species once made to prolong its own day, yet it would still hold the light of the moon, of ice, of fire, of storms, of the magnetic field, of heated stone, and of processes older than any language. When the artificial glow no longer veils the surface, the beauty of Earth would appear in another form, not as a map of habitation, not as a network of power, not as the trace of an expanding civilization, but as a vast living body breathing in the dark, slowly, without the need to prove itself, without the need to be seen in order to continue. In true history, the image of the whole Earth once altered the way a species understood the place of its birth. For the first time, a creature upon the surface could see the entire planet as a blue and white sphere suspended in darkness, with seas, with clouds, with continents, with fragility set against the immensity of space. But in this world, there is no such image. No cultural moment in which a species looks back upon its home from without. No eye stands far enough away to understand that forest, ocean, desert, polar ice, and storm clouds all lie upon the same turning sphere. The greatest difference is not that Earth is less alive. The greatest difference is that no one becomes aware of that beauty. A planet may be vibrant, abundant, radiant, and yet entirely unobserved. It would still hold breeding seasons in dark forests, still carry shoals beneath black water, still send seabirds across storms, still anchor roots in damp soil, still cool molten rock into new stone, still cast moonlight upon polar ice without entering the memory of any civilization. In this scenario, Earth is no less beautiful for lacking artificial light. It is simply beautiful in a way that no one names, no one captures, no one turns into symbol, no one keeps in library, in song, in science, in longing. A world may possess value without being recognized, and whether beauty remains beauty when no mind turns back to call it so remains an open question. When a planet can remain beautiful without being seen, the question that endures is not how brightly it shines in darkness, but whether, at some distant point, from within life itself, an eye deep enough will arise to behold it. In a far future, when this imagined present has receded not merely by centuries but by millions, perhaps tens of millions of years, Earth would not stand still in the absence left by Homo sapiens, for it was never there to begin with. Forests would continue to shift with climate. Islands would rise and be worn away by the sea. Oceans would open new corridors of life. Grasslands might spread beneath different skies, and the transitional zones between forest and plain, shore and marsh, mountain and valley would continue to impose new pressures upon living forms. One lineage would divide, another would vanish. a small group would become isolated, a minor trait preserved, a chance behavior finding use within a particular environment and over many generations. That chance might take shape as something new. Evolution would continue, but it carries no obligation to recreate the human form. Natural selection does not move toward consciousness as a destined end, nor toward technology as a promise, nor toward civilization as a summit every branch must climb. It retains only what survives and reproduces more effectively within given conditions. The question, then, is not which species would immediately replace humanity, but whether, across vast spans of time, a new direction of intelligence might arise from another branch. The most modest answer is also the most precise it may, but it is not inevitable. From that point, possibilities unfold like faint paths in mist, shaped, coherent, yet none revealed as certain prophecy. On some future continent, a lineage of primates might leave the forest more fully, live longer in open land, face denser social pressures, require the memory of more relationships, coordinate more closely, and handle objects with greater skill for foraging, defense, or the passing of experience within the group. Chimpanzees and other great apes already show fragments of society, learning, and tool use. But from a handful of clever acts to cumulative technology lies a long gulf, requiring not only hands, but collective memory, durable teaching, a stable enough environment, sustained pressure, and sufficient opportunity. Elsewhere, perhaps upon an isolated island in the ocean, an intelligent bird lineage might refine memory, social signaling, behavioral innovation, and traditions of learning across generations. Crows, parrots, and their kin have shown that a small brain does not entail a simple mind. Under certain conditions, beak and claw may become instruments of remarkable manipulation, yet the body sets limits. Without flexible hands, without fire readily controlled, without the capacity to fabricate layered materials in a sustained way, an intelligence of the air might travel far in behavior, yet still fall short of machinery, cities, and industry. Beneath the sea, dolphins or whales might open a deeper form of communication, collective memory, and acoustic culture. In water, sound travels far. Social relations may grow complex. Hunting traditions may spread through groups like invisible maps held in living memory. But the ocean also sets a barrier nearly primordial: no fire, no stable dry surface, no store of materials easily kept outside the body. The sea may give rise to cultures of sound, movement, and memory, profound beyond easy imagining, yet not necessarily to writing, metal, factories, or a sky filled with satellites. Across the plains or open woodlands of another future, elephants carry within them a fragment of what intelligence requires: long memory, enduring societies, deep kinship, recognition, and learning across time. Yet elephants are bound by their great size, limited dexterity, and slow reproduction, so that evolutionary change moves at a measured pace. Only if a future branch were smaller, more flexible, more prolific, and placed under the right ecological pressures for long enough, might some of those constraints ease. Even then, it would remain a door that might open, not a path assured to exist. Placed side by side, these branches do not form a list of successors to humanity, but a portrait of intelligence itself as something scattered. One lineage holds social depth but lacks manipulation. Another holds manipulation but lacks transmission across generations. A third holds communication but lacks an environment suited to material technology. Another holds memory yet is restrained by body and reproductive tempo. Intelligence at the level of civilization is therefore both conceivable and uncertain, for it requires not merely a larger brain, but a convergence of conditions, like many rivers meeting within a single valley. Nothing guarantees that such intelligence will return. Evolution does not aim toward awareness, toward tools, toward language, toward hands that build walls or eyes that name the stars. Every path is constrained by environment, body, reproduction, energy, and time. Cumulative culture requires transmission stable enough that what is learned does not vanish within a few generations. Large brains demand energy, food, and an ecosystem rich enough to sustain the cost of prolonged thought. Material technology requires a body that can grasp, turn, assemble, hold, burn, cut, store, and pass onward. Remove one link, and the path may turn elsewhere. If a new intelligence emerges, it may not speak as we do, not use tools as we do, not build cities as we do, not write histories, not measure time by calendars, not name the sky. It may be an intelligence of sound within the ocean, an intelligence of flight paths and island memory, and intelligence of social relations within forests, or a form of awareness so slow it reveals itself only across generations. Perhaps humanity was never the necessary summit of nature. Perhaps it was only a rare answer the Earth once wrote by chance, when body, climate, hands, fire, society, language, and time converged within a single fragile branch. If intelligence returns, it may differ so greatly that it is not recognized as intelligence at all. If it does not return, the planet does not fail. Earth will still turn its seasons, raise its mountains, wear down its stone, nourish its forests, open its seas, erase old traces, and shape new forms of life within the long shadow of time. Whether or not there is any being deep enough to ask of it, this world will continue to do what it has always done. The evening light descends slowly upon a wide African plain, where a great river bends in silence through red earth, catching the last faint streaks of the day, where dry grass glimmers in a deepening amber, where scattered clusters of trees stand like quiet marks upon an open land, where the distant forest is reduced to a dark band resting along the horizon, where there are no roads, no cities, no engines, only a planet continuing to turn in silence, as though it had never known the existence of any civilization. A herd of elephants passes through that scene, slow and heavy, each step lifting red dust that rises and settles again like thin layers of time, their vast bodies moving through the fading light like the final fragments of a story long in the telling, a story that does not need to be spoken to endure. In a nearby shadow, a lion lies still, its form nearly dissolved into the deepening dark, unmoving, unwitnessing, waiting only for the familiar rhythm of its night. From the distant forest, drawn-out calls echo and overlap, dissolving into space like threads of sound, a quiet reminder that somewhere within this world, the possibility of knowing has not entirely vanished, only fallen dormant, scattered, yet to find its shape. Above, A dark bird glides across a sky now dimming from orange into night, its motion so slight it leaves almost no trace before it disappears into the widening void. Everything remains, but in another rhythm. Without humans, the earth does not halt. It does not become perfect as in fables, nor does it turn into an absolute paradise where all things are in harmony and at peace. It simply continues, greener in some places, wilder in others, quieter beneath the vastness of the universe above. It goes on without needing to be observed, without needing to be named, continuing as it has for billions of years before any notion of intelligence came into being. A thought unfolds slowly, as gentle as the fading light upon the river if there were no humans. Which creature would dream the next dream of this planet? Or perhaps intelligence was only an accident, a rare moment the Earth once attempted and then quietly allowed to pass.